Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 4 of the MBL 101 Extremes Mk2 series, and in this part 4 I'm going to disclose what I covered in part 2, which was the head-to-head comparison of the Chord Dave DAC and the Kronus Turntable. I did one song. If you haven't watched that, you're probably going to want to watch that instead of watching this as a spoiler beforehand. It's going to be fun to play along because, as you'll see in this video, I did something that probably I don't think anybody's ever done before in doing one of these comparisons. At least I've never seen it either on YouTube, in print, or at shows. And let me just go ahead and spoil this for you right off the bat. When you heard those two sources, I said it was the same song, but nobody asked in terms of the master for both of them. Was it streaming, a CD on the digital side? The album obviously is an album. For the digital side, it wasn't streaming, it wasn't a CD, it was a ripped version of that album. And this is what was so ear-opening to me. There's very few things at this stage that are ear-opening and surprise me, but I was not expecting the ripped version of an LP to sound so good. And now before I even disclose, think about the differences you heard between 1 and 2, and whichever one you chose is the best. Think of the delta that you heard. Was it as big as you would have thought it was, knowing that 1 is a ripped copy of an album? Now, I will say the person that did the ripping, very qualified. My first exposure to this, I got the whole document of what he goes through and does. And for members of the channel, you know, if you're supporting and paying, I'm going to try to upload this entire thing for you guys. And maybe in the future for the public channel, I may get a turntable and start ripping myself, because this kind of takes a lot of the disadvantages that some people perceive with digital that are warranted. I mean, some of the masters, as I showed in the Adele video, the LP versions are mastered better. They have better dynamic range, and certainly a lot of these older recordings, there is a definite advantage with the LP master. Now, it doesn't mean that the format, it doesn't mean that the medium is better. In a lot of cases, digital medium is better, you know, with the ability to lower noise, bandwidth, certain things can be controlled a lot better in digital, and you don't have the wear and tear, all the different setup issues of the medium of vinyl that can also bring down the performance. Now I can take a LP that's mastered great, and while that's in a good condition, that LP, burn it to a digital medium and play it, and now I've got the same mastering at least. And then the only differences I have, at least in this particular recording, if you heard both, I don't think a lot of people said one was awful and the other one was awesome. You know, I think there was people that picked one versus the other. Some people picked the ripped copy, and believe it or not, I probably would have picked the ripped copy as well, based on what I heard locally. But I'll give pluses and minuses in a second on both. But, you know, people would not have made that choice knowing ahead of time that one was going to be a ripped copy. And if I told you everything and showed you everything, we just have natural biases and preconceived notions. That's one of the macro points I kind of want to get out there, is that the sooner you get rid of all of these preconceived notions and dogmas and getting into camps, or even following certain reviewers, you know, and what they believe or don't believe, you know, the sooner you free yourself of all those things, the better you're going to be. And that's what at least I've learned, because as soon as I just be open to what I hear, that makes a big difference. And now, heck, I might pay this guy or do my own ripping. I've got, like I said, the formula for what he does to rip it in that great fashion. And you can take out ticks and pops. You can do some nuancing things to even make things better. So, for what it's worth, just wanted to give you that heads up. I don't think anybody's done that kind of a comparison of digital to analog in this kind of format on this kind of quality of gear. But if you want to get to know which one was which, believe it or not, the first one was the Chord Dave DAC, and the second one was the Kronus Turntable. Now, there was a little tip-off in the video, and one person figured it out. I had to delete his comments. I usually don't delete comments, and sorry for that guy for doing it. It wasn't anything against him. He did a good job of being detective, but I didn't want it to spoil it for people, but the light on the chord was a little bit brighter in the first demo than the second demo, and so you kind of could tell that that one was maybe playing. But that really wasn't the point of the video, was to even choose which one was playing. You've never heard a Chord Dave DAC on MBL Extremes and their amplification, guaranteed. You haven't heard the Kronus Turntable with a Lyra Atlas on those MBL Extremes. So if you picked it right or wrong, it's not anything to get too excited about or too disappointed about. Yes, your notions and your hearing may have been proven right or wrong in this case, but that's part of the learning. It's getting rid of all of these preconceived notions is the whole point. And really the key was, what was the delta that you heard between the both? And did the things you hear on one versus the other, would that translate with all music? Because let me go ahead and share some of my first-hand impressions while I was there. I actually listened to the LP first live, even though I did the video differently. I listened to the LP first live and then the Chord Dave DAC. And as soon as we switched to the Chord Dave DAC and played that same song, the things I noticed that were better were a little crisper sound, a little better with the transients, tighter bass, had a little bit separation in space, just a clear, concise presentation that just sounded cleaner, a little bit. All of these things are the magnitude of little. I think in a blind test, it would actually be hard for some people, you know, to tell the difference, although you all notice some differences. But those were the main things that I noticed. And then when I got to the Kronus Turntable, I think the presentation was a little denser, maybe a little bit more three-dimensional, and even though it might be not be as clean and concise and tight as the Chord Dave DAC, it had an organic nature that was pretty good and obviously high level. Like, I would be happy with either version of that being in my system. I could listen to each version of that, listen to that song, and be happy at the end of the day. And that's really the key. So in terms of the gear doing its job, A+ on both of them. I don't think there was any major flaws on either one of them. And the fact that the Chord Dave was somewhat handicapped by going through an A to D conversion with their source is one thing, but for whatever the negative is of that A to D conversion, you got to also think of the advantage that the Chord Dave had versus using a streaming version, which, yes, the streaming version may be more pure, but there's probably some analog to digital conversion to create that. And the LP masters, as I've shown with the Adele video and others, sometimes has better dynamic range, better recording, mastering, and quality, especially on older recordings. So to be able to rip that quality of the recording and just get it off of that medium in a high quality format is actually very attractive, and something that, you know, I would pay somebody to do, so that I would have the great mastering of an LP on now a digital medium that I could play back and appreciate. And I would just have to deal with the negatives of that A to D conversion. And then of course there's always going to be some nuance between analog playback and vinyl and preferences. But again, the things that I mentioned, the pluses and minuses on each side, may not translate the same for all type of music. For rock music, you may like the Chord Dave DAC strengths. On other orchestra type music or quartets, you may stick with, oh, I like the Kronos strengths that they do. So a lot of the strengths and weaknesses, even that you can perceive, will be dependent on the type of music you play and also the volume level. So there's a lot of variables that I couldn't go through everything. We just wanted to focus on one track. But I don't think anybody's ever done an analog to digital rip of an LP and giving you that kind of an A-B comparison blind on super high level gear like that. So hopefully you found that helpful and kind of makes you think that whatever preconceived notions you have, you may want to get rid of those, because in future videos I'm going to talk about this in more detail, about all these preconceived notions are things that hampered me in the past. You know, I dismissed things like EQ. Did you hear in the last part 3, the difference between the MBL Extremes mega-dollar gear without EQ on the bass? I didn't think that Greg Brown's track sounded near as good as with the EQ. And I think most people would agree. So just EQ alone in that one song on mega-dollar gear made a world of difference, especially live in the room. So it just preconceived notions against EQ of what digital sounds like, what analog sounds like, all of these things, sometimes they may prove to be true, but it's always good to have an open mind to make sure you don't close yourself off to the possibilities of other notions being true as well. And hopefully that's what came across in this video. So anyway, I'm off to, this is the last video before I go off to Florida. So plenty of stuff coming soon. And like I said, I got some more fun stuff. I'm not going to tip you off onto it just yet, but sign up, subscribe, and I'll see you back here soon.